What's up, everyone? This is Lucas Ross Sports, and you're watching my Lucas Ross Sports channel, and it's time for my college football playoff top 4 standings after week number 7 of the 2022 college football season. Basically, how this video works, I will give you 4 out of the best teams here that I think are considered to be in the college football playoff after week by week. Been kind of doing this ever since week number 1. We've gone back and forth, we've had the same teams, but we have a big change here on these standings. In the top 4 standings, it was just an exciting weekend this past weekend, and there was just a bunch of changes to the top 4 playoff standings here. Last weekend, I had Ohio State here at number 1. I had Georgia at number 2. I basically dropped them a lot when they were, choking in those first couple weeks, but now they're back into that zone and starting to look like the dominant Georgia team that we saw. So let's get right into it here with our college football playoff top 4 standings after week number 7. And as you guys know, the semifinal games will be held here in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl and in the Vrbo Fiesta Bowl. So the number 1 versus number 4 seed will be the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, and then the number 2 versus number 3 seed will be the Vrbo Fiesta Bowl. So we'll start with the number 1 seed here for the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. And I've kind of made a change here for the number 1 seed. It's not really their fault, but they had a bye week this past weekend, but also they played this weekend. And they're hard to predict against. And I'm going to go with Georgia as the number 1 seed here in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. Georgia coming off 2 dominant wins in a row this past weekend. And then the weekend before, that was against Auburn. And then, of course, Vanderbilt at home. So they won both of those games by huge, points there. They started to look like that Georgia team, back when they defeated Oregon by a blowout. So, you're starting to see this Georgia team start to be more dangerous again on both sides of the ball. They get a bye week this weekend. They'll play Florida next weekend. And that's going to be, not a big matchup because usually when the East it's really down to Florida and Georgia in the East. But now it's pretty much down to Tennessee and Georgia now in the SEC East. So, but Florida's coming off a, loss to, of course, LSU at home. So, Georgia pretty much has maybe an easy chance to defeat Florida by a blowout, but I don't think it will be a blowout. I think it will somewhat be a double-digit favorite, though, for Georgia as they head into that game. And the number 2 seed, let's start with the number 2 seed here, the Vrbo Fiesta Bowl. And it wasn't really their fault to just drop down after, being only on the number 1 spot for, just since last week. It's Ohio State. I know they had a bye week this past weekend, and, it's not just because of that. It's just because Georgia had another dominant win this past weekend, and that's why I had to move Georgia back up to number 1. Ohio State, though, they're ranked number 2 in the AP poll. Georgia's ranked number 1. It was a pretty tough call. It was a pretty tough call for the number 1 seed. But Ohio State, they had a bye week this past weekend. They get a, chance to, get back on the field this weekend. And I'm expecting Ohio State to come out dominant against Iowa. Iowa pretty much is, not really good on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, they're pretty good. But, I think Ohio State should really score maybe more than 30 points in this game. So I think the Buckeyes will dominate that game. So not much to talk about Ohio State other than they play Iowa at home. Let's see who they play in the Vrbo Fiesta Bowl if these games were to happen. Like I said, this is not simply a prediction. This is simply a projection. I did go back and do my playoff standings back in the preseason. I had Alabama, Georgia in the number 1 versus number 4 seed, and then I had Ohio State versus number 3, Utah. So Utah is pretty much out of that equation. Alabama could be out of that equation. But let's go to the number 3 seed. It was a pretty tough call for the number 3 seed as well, but I had to go with Michigan. I think Michigan performed well enough to be in this top 4 standings. They dominated against Penn State. You look at that offense in the second half, the running game was really strong. Defensively, the turnover, I think, really changed the game, for Penn State, and that's why they couldn't really get back into that game in the second half. And, Sean Clifford is questionable. Hopefully it's not a serious injury issue for Sean Clifford. And, I think Penn State is still a contender in the Big Ten East, but I think it's coming down to Michigan and Ohio State now in the Big Ten East after, Michigan defeated Penn State this past weekend. So I'm going to say that Michigan is good enough to go here to the college football playoff. Even though they lose, to Ohio State, they could still get in there as a 11-1 team. So I think Michigan deserves to be in this conversation. All right, let's go to the number 4 seed, and you'll be pretty surprised what I put here at the number 4 seed. I had a tough time picking here between these two teams. I just had to see who had the best, big win here. But they had the best big win of the weekend. It was probably the game of the year. It's Tennessee at number 4. I have them at number 4 here in the college football playoff standings. I think just because of the win over Alabama. That's a big one in the SEC. I mean, you look at the offense, they dominated the whole game. Defensively, they got to get better in the secondary. I mean, that defense, I knew they were going to probably take a step back after, giving up 49 points in that game. But, Alabama's offense is good either way. But Tennessee, I had to put them here at number 4 just because they beat Alabama. And I think that's just the biggest win, so far under the Josh Heupel era. And Tennessee still has to play Georgia, though. On the road, that game right there is going to be pretty much deciding the SEC East. But they get a break there this weekend. They'll play UT Martin at home, so not really a big challenge for Tennessee. I mean, both of these teams, Michigan and Tennessee, won't really have big challenges. But, all right, let's go to the predictions now. This is simply not a, prediction. Like I said, it's simply a projection that I think will happen here. But, let's go to the predictions here. If these games are to happen, we'll start with the Georgia versus Tennessee game here in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. Georgia, I think, is clearly the better team here. I mean, both offenses, if you look at them, they're both pretty dangerous, but defensively it goes to Georgia, and I think Tennessee will be held under 30 points in this game. So I'm going to go with the Bulldogs to defeat Tennessee here in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl in the semifinals. Tennessee would get in there as an 11-1 team if they just lost, to Georgia at the, in the regular season. So they'll still be able to get in, even though Alabama might lose that game if they were to play Alabama in the SEC championship. Same thing with here with Ohio State and Michigan. I mean, Michigan had a, big win against, Penn State, but I know Ohio State had a bye week this past weekend, but I still like Ohio State in this game. I still like their offense better than Michigan. I think once these two teams meet out on the field in the, last game of the season, it's going to determine who is the best team out of that Big Ten East race in the top standings. But we got Georgia versus Ohio State here in the national championship. Last week, I think I picked Ohio State. I don't really remember. I think I picked Georgia perhaps, but it's the same thing as last week. Georgia versus Ohio State in the national championship. Now, this game right here is pretty interesting. I mean, I know Ohio State had a bye week. Georgia came off a pretty good win. I still like Georgia. I still like Georgia's offense in this game and their defense. I mean, I know Ohio State's been better on the defensive side of the ball, but Georgia's had a couple dominant wins. I think, with those dominant wins, they would win this national championship. So I'm going to go with Georgia in this, national championship projection. And I think I picked Georgia a lot, over the week, when I did these, top 4 standing playoff projections. But these are my top 4 standings after week number 7 of the 2022 college football season. Let me guys know what you think, and keep subscribing to this channel. Keep following the channel if you are new to this channel, and also stay tuned here for more on the Lucas Ross Sports Channel.